Perhaps for the first time in at least a generation of New Jersey voters, political machines risk defections by disenfranchised voters. Republican-ruled Ocean County, with the rise of Democratic gubernatorial candidate Phil Murphy, and the tattered ends of Republican Chris Christie's administration signal a swing from red to blue. That's kind of the hope of our guests at this hour. Democrat 9th District Assembly hopefuls Jill Dobrowansky and Ryan Young. They're challenging incumbents Brian Rumpf and Diane Goh to represent Southern Ocean, Northern Atlantic, and Eastern Burlington counties. Ms. Dobrowansky's career is in education. She's been a teacher and a school administrator. She holds degrees from Monmouth and Georgian Court Universities. And Mr. Ryan is a communications expert and Army veteran who served in Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. He's got degrees from Rowan and Thomas Edison State University. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
I'll throw the first question out, and it's a jump ball. But you're opposing 2/3 of a team that has undergone essentially 2 changes in the past couple of decades, and basically crafts legislation based on constituent concerns and don't really overcrowd the docket. They kind of pinpoint where they're going. So, in your estimation, how are they not delivering on the mission to which they're assigned, and how would you change it?
Go for it. One of the things that we've noticed is the silence when there needs to be leadership out of Trenton. So for example, we recently just released a statement this week talking about another incident with Governor Christie, intimidating and being verbally abusive to a citizen. And throughout the past 7.5 years, Assemblyman Rumpf and Assemblywoman Gove have been silent. They have not come out and spoke out against the governor and some of his actions that have been now habitual against the public. And we teach our students about harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and how to stand up for victims and how to stand up for themselves against those actions. And yet we feel that that leadership is being silenced in Trenton, and those messages are not getting to the adults in Trenton.
Okay, so keep in mind, okay, how does that character flaw, as you detected, how does that work into their job as legislators? Are you speaking to a defecting character that carries over? Mm-hmm. And in your estimation, is that affecting how they conduct themselves in the legislature?
It's a matter of standing up for the constituents and what's right. And we've had several incidents of this governor lashing out against members of our state and now citizens of the United States at large, and yet no one has spoken up against it. And we feel that Gove and Rumpf should be the first ones standing up against it, especially if they're in his party. They should be saying publicly, this is not how our constituents expect a governor to behave.
Ironically, Governor Christie was at the forefront of a kind of an independent thinking trend. Ocean County was the county that carried him into his first election, and followed suit in the second election. Since that time, Donald Trump has ascended. Mm-hmm. And so that leads to my opening remarks about a wider spread of independent voting. How do you tap into that? How do you tap into that mindset of like, I'm going to go in and make my own decisions. I'm not voting party, I'm voting individual.
Well, it's kind of the way that it's worked for us is the fact that as we go out and we talk to the constituents, and we're out there almost every day of the week right now, talking to different groups, different towns, And we get the independent voters coming to the events we're having, and we talk to them, and they are saying that they are more worried about an issue that relates to them specifically anymore. They're not necessarily looking at they're not worried as much for what is going on in the entire state. They're worried about what's going on, and they realize that what's going on in Trenton right now is that Ocean County, and especially the 9th District, we're losing out. We're not having the representation to fight for us up there anymore. You know, especially like with the recent school funding formula. Almost every district, every school district in our legislative district lost money. Where were our opponents from go fighting to keep that money for our school districts? Because now that's going to turn into the school districts and the municipalities having to raise property taxes again. So then they're going to make it more unaffordable for people in our district, and that's not the right answer. So people are starting to turn to the independent, saying, well, I'm going to look at who's going to help me better at this point.
Now, out of that, ostensibly, let's assume that you're going to be working with a governor in Phil Murphy, who's firmly entrenched in Central and North Jersey, who is independently wealthy, and who is solidifying the party, and people are voting for the party. How do you fit into that, and how do you tap into that while remaining independent?
That we work on that with looking at how our district is laid out and knowing going into it that our district is 49 or 45% of our district is registered undeclared. And so instead of saying, okay, we're going to go toe the exact line with the party, there are things that we don't necessarily toe the exact line because that's not what is good for our constituency. And that is, especially with being outsiders and not having political backgrounds, that's where we work better at, is that we are not connected. We haven't been in Trenton. We don't have, the special interest groups, lobbying us already for stuff. We're out there listening to our constituency, and that is our primary focus. That's who we answer to at the end of the day. They are our employer when we get elected in November. It's not the other groups that we have to worry about. So we are Democrats, and we want to make sure that we continue the democratic values, but at the end of the day, our primary principle is making sure that we do right by those voters in the 9th Legislative District. And that's how we make sure that we stay grounded for the voter, not just for the party.
All right. I'm gonna handle the mic from this point forward. I'll just point it at you
okay.
So that we can stop playing relay with it. But let's talk a little bit about your platform. Let's start with healthcare, which is right there at the top.
Yes.
And a lot of what is driving the train right now is on the federal level. Obamacare and the ostensible replacement, which never seems to be happening. How do you cope with that on the state level? What is you espouse better health care, but what does that mean in concrete terms?
Well, what that means is more of assuring that that if Obamacare stays in, that again our constituency is receiving the benefits that they deserve. However, if something does come out of Washington, legislation comes out of Washington, where that it's going to be a state level decision, we have publicly said that we are in favor of a single payer system, and we have really looked at how the state could then introduce additional legislation so that there would be the monies there to fund a single payer system for the citizens of New Jersey.
How does a single payer system help?
It helps by ensuring that everybody who needs coverage has coverage, and that they have the coverage that they need. there shouldn't be anybody who has a pre-existing condition. We've talked to numerous constituents who have pre-existing conditions who, if a new system comes out, that they may not receive the services that they need to be medically sound and to have a good way of life. So we have to make sure that the single payer system, that all of those constituencies are covered, and that all of the pre-existing conditions are also covered under that, and in addition to that, also female health care, because that's a priority.
One of the things that nobody seems to be addressing in Washington with regard to any health care coverage plan is big pharma, big medicine, and big insurance. They seem to be ruling and dominating the discussion without saying anything. If you're in Trenton, are you willing to take them on?
I say yes, we are. If it's going to benefit a system where that everyone in New Jersey is covered, we would be willing to take them on.
Anything you want to add to that?
Well, yes, it's not only do we want to take them on, if need be, but we also want to first try to sit down and work with them. We want to make sure that, it seems to be in Trenton and in Washington, compromise has become the dirty C word nowadays, and that's not the way it should be. Even for my age category, where I'm on the very, very beginning age of the millennials, I still remember when politics worked back in the day. You go back to Reagan and Tip O'Neill, and yes, they were on different sides of the aisle. They fought like cat and dogs, but stuff got done for the good of the people, not for the good of the parties. And that's where we want to try to get back to. So we want to sit down and have that conversation across the aisle to make sure that everyone is included in this decision. Kind of like what Trenton just did with the budget with Horizon. They brought them into the table because in New Jersey we're lucky enough to have still a non-profit healthcare insurer company. And to want to try to almost run them out of town by stealing their safety net for their insurers, that's not the right answer. So let's at least try to sit down and bring them to the table, and let's figure this out. Let's find a compromise that's going to work not only for the insurance companies but pharma also, and still make sure that we are doing right by the people at the end of the day, first and foremost.
Let's move to education a little bit. I think you know a little thing or two about it. And you've worked in the public school system. You understand it. You've also worked in it long enough to have been there for the advent of charter schools. And so I'd like to know it from your perspective, because I'm seeing a totally schizophrenic system here in which public schools are expected to deliver, but their funds are being sapped by schools that are outside the purview, don't answer to the same rules, and basically are competing with them. Do you agree with that system, or am I missing the point of all this?
No, you're not missing the point of all of this. Originally, when charter schools were implemented, it was because they were supposed to be centers of innovation. They were supposed to be schools that looked at innovative practices. That was something very different than the public education system. However, that has not come to fruition. And the rate at which the charters are now being approved and handed out, they are sapping from the public school system, because that monies now part of those monies go to the charter schools, but yet we're not seeing a massive reduction in class size. So you're not reducing your costs in the public system. So we propose that we put a moratorium right now on charters, approved charters, and really take a hard look at, okay, are these schools working? Are they claiming what they originally said they were going to do? And then work with the different parties in order to fix that part of it that's broken, where that they're not places of innovation, and then work to also help bring those kids back into the public system. What does the public system need to do in order to meet the needs of those students also?
How about the quality of education with regard to the standardized tests? would you advocate moving away from the overwhelming importance of standardized tests and teaching to the test and restoring critical thinking?
I would. Having been in public education, I've seen, again, the different movements through standardized testing. Recently we made the shift from the New Jersey Ask to the PARC, and now these scores are now tied to the teacher evaluation performance levels also. And I don't think it's fair for our teachers to have 30% of their overall rating tied to a test, a high stakes test that our students are being stressed to take. Our students are, like you said, they're being, prepared ahead of time in some cases to take the test, whether that's test prep or, how to take test taking skills. But it's taking away from critical teaching time. And that's not fair to our students, and it's not fair to our teachers.
Let's talk a little bit about higher education, shall we, Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
How would you bring college and university financial structures into focus and into accountability so that you can achieve the kind of debt-free and affordable upper-level education that you espouse?
Well, I mean, I am a product of the New Jersey Community College program. The degree you mentioned earlier from Rowan it's actually an associate's degree from what used to be Burlington County College back then. Now it's obviously Rowan College of Burlington County. But that was one of the best systems, and I've noticed more and more that our community college is starting to disappear in the state. Rowan bought up Burlington County College. Keene has been involved with Ocean County College now. We're starting the bigger four-year schools are starting to buy up our community colleges, and that's where then the prices are getting driven up now. It's not fair to those that are trying to make it through college on minimal debt, if not zero debt. So it's, and during my time there, I was a student worker there. Even with me using the GI Bill, because of my time in the service, I still worked there. I still made sure to give back to it at that point, and I saw the struggles people were having, to make even payments at the community college because they were worried about moving on to the four-year. So we need to sit down with the education department and things like the NJEA, and we need to figure out what needs to be done to bring this cost down, because this is part of the reason we're losing, right now, our millennials that are getting ready to graduate and our college grads, they're becoming almost our second export right now, our second biggest export out of the state, compared to Jersey tomatoes. So it's, that's not the right answer, because that's also then affecting our innovation. We're not keeping the workers anymore. So we need to get industries back in, not only get industries back in, but let's see if we can get them to help with the cost then too at that point. And then they have, a much bigger pool of potential workers to be able to pull from them. So as their companies come into the state, now they get involved so that the training programs in these schools are directed towards those industries. And now we're getting our millennials to stay. They're coming out of college with minimal debt, and they're getting a job right away, which then keeps them in the state, which then also helps our bottom line, in revenue, because now they're staying. Now they're going to be starting to get apartments and then eventually houses. And now we're adding to them being a part of the overall taxpayer base in our state. So it's a very big problem that is a multi-step thing that you need to almost tackle as one big thing, because you need multiple entities to get involved in it. It's not one problem where you can say, okay, we're going to go talk to the schools and say, you need to lower your costs. That's not going to work. You need to work with them, not talk at them. And that seems to be one of the bigger problems right now that we're having in Trenton, is they're in Trenton trying to dictate what people need to do and industries need to do, and that's why things are leaving, and things aren't sustainable anymore. You need to get back to that talking with, not talking to.
Our guests are Jill Dobransky and Ryan Young, who are running for the 9th District Assembly seats. And you can find out all about them at jillandryanfornj.com. In the meantime, let's look at the district that you want to cover. Little Burlington, Little Ocean, Little Atlantic, and the biggest thing in all of it is the Pinelands. Pinelands Preserve commands special note in your policy overview, yet the population around it keeps building. So in your effort to protect that preserve, where do you draw the line on incursion so that it can remain what it is but still provide enough room to support everybody in the region with the infrastructure they're going to need to exist?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of that is also still supporting the continuation of the Pinelands Preserve. That's important. It's important to our ecosystem here within the state. And then also look at the building requirements, because each municipality sets the lot size requirements and the different types of housing structures that can be built in certain areas. And, you know, look to see if there's, you know, a town or a township that is doing it well, and then look to maybe recreate that, or actually provide the communication and the connections so that other towns can work together in order to support you know, growth and development, but also at the same time protect the pinelands.
And on the other side of it, you've got Barnegat Bay and the Atlantic Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
You get the best of everything.
We do.
Yes, we do.
We love that district.
And Barnegat Bay has had its problems.
Yes.
So, what do you think has gone wrong with it so far, and what would you change?
Well, for Barnegat Bay, it's still recovering from Sandy at this point. You know, we're still behind in getting not only just the bay cleaned up, but in general people back into their homes too. And you know, with the bay, you can look it up. You know, yes, our opponents, they proposed a bill to let the municipalities dredge the bay to finally clean up, but their answer to paying for it was to issue bonds. So they're also creating, you know, greater debt on the people then in the long run for that too, because that's something not only are we going to have to pay back, but we're going to have to pay that back with interest then. So that's becoming more of a tax burden then. So at that point then, we need to work with what we have in our budget now and figure out ways of being able to pay for it without increasing people's, you know, liability on it. But it is a priority to clean up. It needs to be cleaned up. It is one of our staples down in LD9, and it needs to be there for the public to enjoy, not, you know, the I don't want to say eyesore, but it's in trouble still, and it needs to be, you know, cleaned up, because that way we can bring back, you know, our ecosystem at that point then, you know, and make it a true attraction again for tourism at that point.
And you mentioned Sandy and the effect on the bay, and it also had affected a lot of families.
Yes.
Yes.
And you live right in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
Little Egg, Tuckerton, we can go on for a long time about how much has yet to be done. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you have considered doing as assembly members that would bring people back into their houses, get the things rebuilt that aren't rebuilt yet, and get the ones elevated that aren't elevated yet?
I think it's also looking at the current legislation that was passed regarding the clawback letters. So anybody who has received a loan or a grant through any of the programs are now getting these letters back saying that you now have to repay because you A, haven't gotten all of your work done, or B, you know, it did not meet the standards set forth, or C, that they were taken advantage of by crooked contractors. And so now we have residents who are now receiving letters. I was speaking to one person, received a clawback letter saying that she had 30 days to pay back $25,000. That's not fair. How is that person, who's still not in her home, how is she supposed to be able to do that? And there was recent legislation passed so that, you know, the clawback time period to repay would be extended, but I don't think it went far enough for our residents and for our constituents, because they are still struggling. Like we said, there's still some that are not in their homes and are still renting and still have to work in order to try to support themselves. So, you know, we have to look at the time frames and really extend those much further, and then also work with the municipalities for residents who may be caught up in red tape still, who can't get permits to get work done, or who may still be, you know, trying to get approvals through municipal townships.
One more thing about the environment, and I'll go back to the pilelands for a second. And let me just go back to you on this because we were discussing it before. There have been several attempts to place pipelines underneath it. There are multiple reasons. Ironically, one of them would stop a coal burning plant and convert it into gas burning plant. And truth be told, they're not completely desecrating virgin forests. They're going through developed areas of the pinelands. But that notwithstanding, do you see any way to accomplish the same goals and bring energy needs into the area through alternative energy, which so far has been handcuffed by exorbitant expense and very little incentive to invest?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and one of the major issues for LD9 that we're facing is the shutdown of Oyster Creek Power Plant in Lacey Township. That's responsible for 45% of their taxes, of their tax income every year. That would decimate Lacey Township if nothing was done with that plant. And you know, Ryan and I have both spoken out that we feel that we definitely need to work with the corporation who owns it, but then also with the township and the state level organizations to maybe, you know, bring in some sources of renewable energy. Maybe build a solar field plant there, or that would still be able to bring in the revenue that the township needs, but then also still be able to provide the jobs for those township residents and the townships beyond, because they are an employer in the area also. So we definitely do need to really take a hard look at areas that we could install a wind farm, solar field farms within the LD9 district, and then, you know, make it happen so that we're not so reliant upon a pipeline or a coal burning plant.